Hi, hello everyone. I'm so glad and very privileged, to discuss with you my thoughts about these Japanese concepts of well-being. And so, welcome to this exploration of Japanese concepts of well-being. And I want to begin with a challenge. If you search for Ikigai online, you'll almost certainly encounter a Venn diagram showing four overlapping circles. What you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. This diagram has been shared millions of times, and it appeared, to in a lot of corporate training programs, life coaching materials, and even best selling books. But there's just one problem. The diagram was not of Japanese origin. This diagram was created by Andres Susunaga, who is a Spanish-born astrologer living in the United States, who had no connection to how Japanese people actually understand Ikigai, and the concept was actually, the diagram was actually popularized by Mark Quinn, a British community builder, in a blog post, which went viral, leading to the widespread, though technically inaccurate, belief that this Venn diagram is a traditional Japanese framework. So this Western appropriation and distortion of a Japanese concept perfectly illustrate why this module exists and why we need to approach cultural concepts with humility, curiosity, and a willingness to unlearn what we think we know. So in the next 15 minutes, I'll introduce you to several indigenous Japanese concepts that offer genuinely different perspectives on what it means to live well. These aren't exotic curiosities to add to your intervention toolkit. They are invitations to question assumptions that may be so deeply embedded in the Western positive psychology that we don't even notice them. So let's start with discussing the two dimensions of happiness in Japan. Japanese has multiple words for happiness, and the distinction between them reveals something important about the multidimensional nature of well-being. The two I want to highlight are Shiawase and Ikigai. Shiawase refers to happiness arising from ordinary, everyday experiences. The warmth of a good meal, the pleasure of a conversation with a friend, the satisfaction of completing a small task well. It is immediate, it is embodied and rooted in the present experience. Shiawase doesn't require anything special to happen. It can be found in the most mundane moments if one is attentive. On the other hand, Ikigai, although it has no direct English term, has been associated with the phrase reason for living, or in French, raison d'être, which is very close to what Ikigai stands for as a Japanese concept of achieving a better and more fulfilling life. But what gives life worth in the Japanese understanding and context is quite different, from what the Western Venn diagram suggests. In fact, the psychiatrist Mieko Kamiya, who wrote the foundational Japanese text on Ikigai in 1966, emphasized that Ikigai is found primarily in small, everyday experiences, just like in the case of Shiawase as well, and not in the grand career achievements or world-changing missions. For many Japanese people, ikigai might be found in morning routines, tending a garden, preparing a tea, caring for grandchildren, or pursuing a hobby with devotion. However, ikigai encompasses one sense of purpose, the meaning of existence, and it has a temporal orientation, meaning that ikigai as an ongoing process of meaning in action that spans the past, present, and future, rather than privileging a single temporal pole. Ikigai is also a goal-seeking nature, according to a Japanese researcher Michiko Kumano. But these need not be work focused or work related. In fact, the researcher Akihiro Hasegawa found that only one out of three of Japanese people associate, their ikigai with work. So this contrasts sharply with the Western version, which places career and monetization at the center. The authentic Japanese understanding of Ikigai doesn't require that your source of meaning be something you are paid for. That's something the world needs, or even something you're particularly skilled at. Yes, you might find deep Ikigai in an activity that you're not that you're mediocre at. That benefits particularly only yourself, and that you could never monetize. What matters is the felt sense that this activity makes your life worth living. That is Ikigai. As mentioned earlier, Ikigai has trans-temporal orientation. Ikigai isn't necessarily a single overarching purpose that defines one entire life. Think of Mother Teresa, or Nelson Mandela. Um, Japanese often use the word in plural and contextual ways. One might have different ikigai at different life stages, or multiple ikigai simultaneously. For example, a retired person's ikigai might shift from work to community involvement to simply watching the seasons change. So this fluidity contrasts with the Western emphasis on finding your one true grand purpose in life. So this has implications for positive psychology practice, because if we approach clients with the assumption that meaningful life requires identifying a grand purpose and aligning career with uh, passion, we may be imposing a culturally specific and arguably quite demanding model of well-being. The Japanese understanding suggests that meaning can be found in the ordinary, the small, the unambitious. Sometimes the most profound ikigai is simply being present to daily life with gratitude and attention. So this distinction maps roughly onto the hedonic and eudaimonica divide in Western well-being research. Shiawase is hedonic. It is about that felt pleasure, positive emotion, but it is a particular kind of hedonia, though, one that is rooted in ordinary moments rather than peak experiences or major achievements. And Ikigai is eudaimonic. It's it's more focused on the meaning and purpose of life. Yukiko Uchida's research at Kyoto University has shown that Japanese and American associate happiness with different things. Americans tend to link happiness with personal achievement, excitement, and high arousal, positive emotions. On the other hand, Japanese tend to associate happiness with interpersonal harmony, social connection, and low arousal positive emotions, such as calm contentment. These aren't just different words for the same thing. They reflect genuinely different conceptions of what happiness is. For positive psychology practice, this suggests caution about whether boosting positive affect through high intensity interventions is universally appropriate. In the Japanese cultural context, and perhaps in other countries that value harmony and restraint, such as China and Korea, well-being might be better supported by cultivating attention to ordinary pleasures in life, deepening that relational harmony with others, and embracing that low arousal positive states that Western psychology has sometimes overlooked. Now, another concept I want to introduce is the concept of wa, which means harmony in a much richer sense than the English word conveys. Wa refers to the peaceful unity and conformity within a social group. The sense that the group is functioning smoothly, that relationships are in balance, and conflicts has been avoided or resolved. The kanji character wa appears everywhere in Japanese culture. It means Japanese style, like in washoku, or meaning Japanese food, and captures something essential about the Japanese social values. Wa isn't just an absence of conflict. It is a positive state that requires active cultivation. Maintaining wa involves reading situations carefully, and we call it the kuki o yomu, literally reading the air, or adjusting one's behavior to preserve group harmony, and prioritizing collective well-being over individual expression. And this can involve practices that Western individualism might find uncomfortable. For example, restraining personal opinions, deferring to a group consensus, or accepting roles that subordinate individual preferences to the collective need. For positive psychology, this raises very challenging questions, I think. Much of the Western well-being research emphasizes authenticity, self-expression, and the pursuit of personal goals. But if well-being is fundamentally relational, as other frameworks you studied may have suggested, then maintaining wa might itself be a source of deep satisfaction. The sense of belonging to a harmonious group of people, of contributing to the collective well-being, of being part of something larger than yourself, may provide meaning that individualistic pursuits cannot match. Now, closely related to what is the concept of amae, which the psychoanalyst Takeo Doi identified as central to the Japanese psychology. Amae is difficult to translate, because it doesn't have a direct English translation, but it does refer to a kind of emotionally dependent, indulgent reliance on another person, grounded in the desire to be loved, cared for, and spoiled by them. Doi argued that amae is a fundamental human need that the Western culture suppress, whereas in the Japanese culture, they acknowledge and accommodate it. In the healthy form of amae, amae describes the comfortable dependence between a parent and child, romantic partners, close friends, and even individuals and their social groups. It's that security of knowing you can rely on others' goodwill without having to earn it through achievement or performance. The person experiencing amae can therefore relax their self-sufficiency, reveal their vulnerability, and trust in being taken care for. Western psychology tends to pathologize dependence, valorize autonomy, independence, and self-reliance as markers of psychological health. But the Japanese perspective suggests that this may be culturally biased. Humans are independent beings, and the capacity to comfortably depend on others and to allow others to depend on us might be essential to well-being rather than a sign of immaturity. So the implications for relational selfhood are very profound. If amae is a legitimate psychological need, then well-being cannot be achieved through individual effort alone. It requires relationships characterized by mutual acceptance, trust, and willingness to support each other's vulnerability. Now, I want to close with two final concepts that capture dimensions of well-being often missing from Western frameworks. The first is the concept of ibasho, which literally means a place where one is, but it does carry the connotation of belonging, of having a social place where one fits. Ibasho isn't just a physical location, it is that felt sense of having somewhere you belong in the social world. Japanese researchers have found that ibasho strongly predicts psychological well-being, particularly among young people and elderly populations. You might have heard of this, but the phenomenon of hikikomori, that severe social withdrawal affecting hundreds of thousands of Japanese young people can be understood as a crisis of ibasho. These individuals feel they have no place in this social world, no context, where they belong. The concept of ibasho resonates with what you've learned from other cultural frameworks. Ubuntu emphasizes belonging to community. Te Ware Tapa Wa positions family and social connection as essential walls of the well-being house. But ibasho adds something specific, the importance of felt belonging, the subjective sense that one has a place. You can be surrounded by people and still lack ibasho. But on the other hand, you can be physically alone and still have it if you feel securely connected to a community that values you. The final concept is wabi-sabi, an aesthetic and philosophical principle that finds beauty in imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness. Wabi originally referred to the melancholy of living in nature, while sabi meant cold or withered. Together, wabi-sabi, they describe an appreciation for things that are modest, humble, and marked by age or wear. The cracked tea bowl, the weathered wood, the asymmetrical garden are just a few examples of the concept of wabi-sabi. Wabi-sabi stands in stark contrast to Western perfectionism and positive psychology, emphasis on optimal functioning. It suggests that well-being might involve accepting, even appreciating our flaws, our limitations, and our mortality. The pursuit of perfection from this perspective is not just futile, but aesthetically impoverished. There is beauty in the imperfect, wisdom in accepting transience, and peace in letting go of the need to be complete. For positive psychology practice, wabi-sabi offers a counterweight to strengths-based approaches that can inadvertently create pressure to optimize, improve, and perfect oneself. It reminds us that embracing limitations might be a form of flourishing. The cracked ball is beautiful because of its cracks, not despite them. As a final note, as you reflect on these Japanese concepts, Shiawase, Ikigai, amae, ibasho, and wabi-sabi, notice how they challenge assumptions embedded in Western positive psychology. That meaning requires grand purpose, that autonomy trumps interdependence, that happiness means high intensity positive emotion, that belonging is optional, and that well-being means becoming the best version of yourself. Japanese wisdom suggests that perhaps living well is simpler and more ordinary than we've made it to be, and that sometimes the most profound flourishing is found in accepting life exactly as it is.